Oh yeah, here we go. Hello, Maya. Okay, here we go. Hi, I'm Drew Hoffman from UC Davis, and today I want to talk about the question, why compare the American welfare state to those in other countries, and how would we go about doing that? So I think there's three reasons why you might want to do this. One is that it helps us to understand what's unique or special about the American welfare state by comparing it to other countries. A second thing is it can be sort of liberate one's mind to sort of think about alternatives or new ways of doing things, ways that reforms that you might want to make in the United States. I think a lot of people were quite impressed by the Swedish welfare state and its family policies, and so you might want to makes you start to think about, well, could we achieve that in the United States? And Hillary Clinton has been proposing it. If she's elected, it won't happen because the House will still be Republican, so it's not going to happen. But it's nice to think about. Lastly, later in the course, we're going to examine a bunch of theories, political theories about why the American welfare state looks the way it does. Okay, and actually, those theories are not just about why the American welfare state does. They're theories about why all welfare states look the way they do. Okay, and people have these theories, and they're about things about democracy or the way that the political institutions are set up in different countries or the power of business in different countries, things like that. And they use the differences in all the countries to test those theories, okay? So you may have an argument that you may have a theory that countries with strong labor movements are going to have bigger, better welfare states, okay? And then you would compare the size of the labor movement in every country and then look at how big is the welfare state in every country, okay? And then often you'll combine multiple arguments to do this, okay? So those are sort of the three reasons that we want to do this comparison. Many ways to compare welfare states. These are the ones I'm going to talk about. One has to do with how much do they spend, and we've already had some reading that suggests that that's really not the best way to do it, okay? That expenditures are not the same thing as benefits to the people. The United States, for example, spends more than any other country by far on healthcare, but doesn't cover everyone and has worse health outcomes, okay? So just spending more is not enough, okay? So that's one way. A third way is this concept of the three worlds of welfare, and you'll notice often when we look at tables of all the rich countries that they'll break into sort of three families, okay? And so one family is the liberal family. You might also consider this the neoliberal or the free market family. And it's mainly the English-speaking countries, okay? US, UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, okay? All former British colonies. And then we have the social democratic school, Bernie Sanders school, right? That family is the Scandinavian countries, Sweden, Finland, Norway, Denmark, okay? And then lastly, the conservative regime. That's kind of not the best name. Some people also call it the corporatist regime, meaning that there's a lot of focus on different groups in society and giving different benefits to different groups within the society. And so this is mainly Central Europe, Germany, Austria, France, places like that. Okay, so that's another way we can sort of compare different welfare regimes. And then lastly, and this was the subject of our last, basically this week, how does the welfare state treat gender? How does it treat race and ethnicity? How does it treat immigration, disability, sexual orientation, things like that? Okay, you can really compare welfare states on these various dimensions. And then I guess quite a bit more specific way to compare welfare states would be in terms of individual aspects of their programs. And I think this slide is going to be relevant to you when you write your papers as well, because it gives you a sort of a sense of how different programs can vary. So one is about spending, we mentioned that. Another thing is you can compare countries on, do they have all the programs that most countries have? Okay, most of Europe has family allowances. The United States does not. Most of Europe, actually the whole world, all the rich world has universal health care. Okay, the United States does not. Okay, so things like that. Okay, do they have paid? Many countries have paid sick leave. The United States does not. Population coverage. You may have, well, healthcare is a good example. So we do have a new healthcare program, the Affordable Care Act, but it doesn't cover everyone, okay? So how much of the population is covered by a particular program? If you're a very egalitarian welfare state, you want to try and cover everyone, okay? How good are the replacement rates? In other words, how generous is a particular program? If it's a service program, how good is the quality? In the United States, most people buy their child care in the private market, okay? They pay a child care provider. And that care is widely variable, okay? Some of it is excellent, but you got to pay for it. Some of it just sucks and is dangerous, okay? And the stuff is not that well regulated either, okay? Compare that to Sweden. People do pay for their child care, but there's some subsidization from the state. But an important factor is that you must have a college degree to work in a daycare in Sweden, okay? And those daycares are very much more like schools. They're much more educationally oriented, okay? So it's really a different standard of quality within childcare there. Okay, how strict are the eligibility rules? Do you visit people's houses to make sure that they're not, that they don't have a TV or something that they shouldn't have? Do you make them wait for a while before you'll let them into the program? Do you require tax returns for many years before you let them in? Okay, so how strict are you about the eligibility requirements? Do your programs try and prevent problems from happening in the first place, or do they just take care of those problems after they've already happened? Healthcare would be a good example here. Some countries spend a lot of money on vaccination, immunization, lots of sort of primary care checkups and stuff with the hope that they can prevent people from getting ill later, which they hope will both reduce costs and, increase societal benefit, because it's always better to never get sick than to get sick and be cured, okay? Some countries, Sweden is a good example, although this has changed quite a bit in recent decades, had a historical commitment to full employment, meaning that they ran their economy in such a way that unemployment rates were quite low, and they did a variety of things, active labor market policy, to try and promote high levels of employment. Lastly, taxation. Well, not lastly, almost lastly. Taxation. How progressive is the tax system? Okay? How much do you take in taxes? And then lastly, centralization. This is a key point for the United States. We have 50 states here. Those states have quite a bit of power over welfare programs. Many welfare programs are a sort of dual, a joint between the federal government and the states, okay? Medicaid is an example. TANF, or Temporary Aid to Needy Families, is another example. So, it's paid for by both the states and the federal government, and both of them try and regulate that program. That's unusual, okay? And it also means that there's a lot of regional inequality in the United States, okay? Southern states in particular, and Republican states, tend to provide less for their citizens than do other states, okay? So you'll have a much more generous sort of state welfare state in a state like California than you would in Mississippi, okay? Maybe California's not the best example. Let me think of a better example. Washington, okay? So Washington versus Mississippi, Washington wins, okay? All right, so these are some sort of things that you could deal with in your welfare state. Like, you can make a decision whether you want your new programs to be run at the federal level or at the state level, or both, okay? Things like that. Recognizing that oftentimes things that are run at the federal level are more standardized and often more generous as well. Things that are run at the state level tend not to be quite as generous, and especially in some states. We've seen this table before. This is an attempt to compare welfare states based on the percentage of GDP that they spend on their welfare state. Another way of doing it would be in terms of dollars with purchasing power parity. Howard, who we read, made the argument that the US is not great, but they're not that bad once you start to measure in this way. And especially if you start to measure by, where's the US? Here. Especially if you start measuring by dollars, the US starts to look quite a bit better.